I set the folder down on the kitchen table without saying a word. Just placed it there, squared the corners, and pulled out a chair. My wife's brother was sitting across from me with that look he always had, the one that said he was waiting for something. I didn't give it to him. I just sat down and folded my hands and waited. That was a Tuesday morning in late autumn. The pohutukawa out the front had already started showing its red. I remember thinking it looked like a warning nobody had bothered to read. My name is Graham Hewitt. I'm 63 years old. I spent 34 years working for a civil engineering firm out of Hamilton, mostly project management on infrastructure, water treatment, road drainage, the unglamorous work that keeps a city running. I retired early at 59 because my knees were giving out, and because I had enough put away to live simply if I was careful. I'm not a complicated man. I like my vegetable garden. I like the cricket in summer. I like cooking a proper Sunday roast. I am not the sort of man who looks for trouble, but trouble, as I've learned, doesn't wait to be invited. I married my wife, Diane, when I was 51. She was 47. We'd both been through marriages before mine ended amicably, when my first wife and I simply grew in different directions after our children left home. Diane's first husband had passed away from a heart condition when she was 42, leaving her with a teenage son, Connor, and a modest life insurance payout that she said she'd burned through in the first 2 years of grief. I didn't judge her for that. Grief is its own kind of emergency. We met through mutual friends at a barbecue in Teawamutu. She laughed at something I said about water pipes, which is not a common reaction, and I found her refreshing. We dated for 2 years before I suggested we marry. My daughter from my first marriage, Rachel, told me to take my time. I told her I was 51. Not 25 time was not something I had to spare. Diane moved into my house in Pirongia. Her son Connor was 19 by then, and he moved in too, which I accepted without complaint. I had raised 2 children of my own. I understood that a mother doesn't simply leave her son behind. Connor had just finished school with underwhelming results and was, according to Diane, figuring things out. I was patient. I know what it's like to be 19 and unsure of yourself. I gave him a year. The year became 2. The 2 became 3. Connor figured out how to use the spare bedroom as a permanent residence, how to eat everything in the refrigerator without replacing it, and how to always have somewhere else to be when the lawns needed mowing. He was 23 when I retired, and he was still there, still figuring things out, still without a job that lasted more than a few months, still borrowing the ute to drive to places he never quite explained. I want to be fair to Connor. He wasn't a bad person. He wasn't cruel or aggressive. He was simply adrift in a way that his mother had decided it was my responsibility to accommodate. And I had, for years, accommodated it. That is on me. I know that now. The financial arrangement in our marriage was straightforward, at least on paper. I had my superannuation and a small investment income. Diane had a part-time job at a dental reception in town, 3 days a week. We had a joint account for household expenses, groceries, rates, power, the usual, into which I deposited $2,000 each fortnight. Diane contributed what she could, which was irregular, and I didn't make an issue of it. I was the one with the stable income. I had agreed, in the spirit of partnership, to carry more of the weight. What I hadn't agreed to was becoming a silent ATM for a household that was quietly expanding its definitions of necessity. It started small enough that I dismissed it. An extra 100 here. A charge I didn't recognize there. I noticed, in the spring of my second year of retirement, that the joint account balance was consistently lower than it should have been. I mentioned it to Diane once, casually, over dinner. She said she'd had some unexpected expenses. Connor had needed help with his car. There'd been a bill she'd forgotten to mention. I accepted that. Couples have these conversations all the time, but it kept happening. By the following summer, I started keeping a simple notebook. Nothing formal, just dates and amounts. Withdrawals that didn't correspond to anything I could identify in our household. I'm an engineer by training. I record things. I measure things. It's not suspicion. It's habit. Over 14 months, I recorded 61 withdrawals from the joint account that I could not account for. The total came to just over $22,000. I want you to understand what $22,000 means to a retired man living carefully on a fixed income in rural Waikato. It's not an abstraction. It's a year and a half of careful living. It's the emergency fund I'd built over decades of working underground on construction sites in all weather. It's the buffer between dignity and difficulty. I didn't confront Diane immediately. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be certain. I'm not the sort of man who makes accusations he can't support. So, I kept watching. I kept recording. And over the next 3 months, I quietly moved my superannuation payments and my investment distributions to a new account, one in my name alone, at a different bank. Not a secret, exactly. A precaution. The kind of precaution a man takes when he's looked at the numbers and understood what they're telling him. I also, and I want to be clear about this, rang a solicitor in Hamilton. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me what my options were, what documentation I would need, and what rights I had under New Zealand property law regarding assets brought into a relationship. I left her office an hour later with a clearer head and a file of notes I kept in the locked drawer of my desk. The morning I set that folder on the kitchen table, Diane had already left for work. It was just me and Connor. He'd come downstairs at 9:30 in the singlet and board shorts he seemed to wear regardless of the season, poured himself a bowl of cereal, and sat down across from me, with the incurious expression of a man who had never once worried about where his next meal was coming from. I asked him how the job at the packaging place was going. He'd started there 6 weeks earlier, his 5th or 6th job since I'd known him. He shrugged, said it was all right. I nodded. I slid the folder across the table toward him. He looked at it, the way you look at a piece of mail you already know is bad news. What's this? Have a look, I said. He didn't touch it. So, I opened it for him. The first page was a spreadsheet. I'd compiled dates, amounts, the account they'd been drawn from, and in the final column, a brief notation of what the withdrawal appeared to have been used for where I could determine it. I'd done my research. I had bank statements. I had receipts I'd found in the recycling. I had screenshots of online shopping deliveries that had arrived at the house for Diane and Connor while I was out at my men's group on Thursday mornings. He looked at the page for a long time without speaking. I think there might be some mistake, he said, eventually. There's no mistake, I said. I've been recording this for over a year. I've had a solicitor review the documentation. I know what's been happening. He looked up at me then. And for a moment I saw something genuine cross his face, not anger, not defiance, but something younger and more uncertain. Something that reminded me he was 26 years old and had been allowed by everyone around him to remain permanently unfinished. Does Mum know you have this? He asked. Your mother will know this afternoon, I said. I wanted to speak with you first. I want to be honest about why. I had hoped, perhaps naively, that Connor might show some accountability, that he might offer something, an explanation, an acknowledgement, some indication that he understood the gravity of what had been happening. I think I was still, even then, trying to find a version of this that didn't require me to blow up my marriage. He didn't give me that. He stared at the spreadsheet for another minute, then pushed his cereal bowl aside and said, I think this is between you and Mum. I closed the folder. I thanked him for his time, and I went back to my vegetable garden and staked the tomatoes. Diane rang me at 2:30 that afternoon. She had clearly spoken to Connor. Her voice was the particular kind of control that people use when they are furious but trying not to sound it. She asked me what I was playing at. I told her I wasn't playing at anything. She told me she'd tried to transfer money for the grocery shopping and the joint account was lower than she'd expected. I told her that was because I'd been redirecting my income to a separate account for the past 6 weeks. The controlled quality disappeared from her voice. She asked me how I could do something like that without telling her. I said that I had been patient for a long time, and that I had documentation of over $22,000 in withdrawals I had not authorized, and that I thought it was reasonable, under those circumstances, to take steps to protect what remained of my savings. She called it a betrayal. She used that word, betrayal. I have thought about it since. I suppose she meant that I had acted unilaterally, that I had made a financial decision without consulting her. I understand how it might look that way from where she was standing, but I kept thinking about 61 withdrawals. I kept thinking about the Thursday mornings I'd been at my men's group while deliveries arrived at my house, paid for with money I'd earned doing drainage surveys in the rain and scheduling pipe installations in the dark of a Waikato winter. I kept thinking about 34 years of work and the particular exhaustion of a man who has spent decades doing the kind of job that nobody sees until something goes wrong. She said she'd be home by 4 and we would sort this out. She arrived at 3:45, and she was not alone. Connor was with her, which I had expected. What I had not expected was that Diane's sister, Robin, was also in the car. Robin lived in Morrinsville and had always treated me with the polite indifference of someone who found her sister's second husband mildly baffling. She came through the front door behind Diane with the purposeful energy of a person who has been fully briefed in the car on the way over and has decided to treat the situation as a personal affront. They all sat down in the lounge. I made tea because I didn't know what else to do and because the ritual of it gave me something to do with my hands. Diane started by saying that this wasn't what it looked like. I asked her what she thought it looked like. She said she'd been helping Connor get back on his feet, that he'd had some debts from when he was younger, that he'd been too embarrassed to tell me about, that she'd been trying to deal with it quietly, without causing drama, because she knew I could be. She paused here, rigid, about money. Rigid. That was the word she chose. I went to the desk. I came back with the folder. I sat down and I opened it and I set it on the coffee table between us. I had 3 copies, one for the discussion, one for my solicitor, one for my records. I said, calmly, that I had no objection to discussing Connor's debts. I said I had no objection to the idea that there were things in this household that needed dealing with. I said that what I did object to was 61 withdrawals made without my knowledge or consent over 14 months. Robin said that as Diane's husband I should have been more involved in the finances. I looked at her for a moment. I said that as the person whose income comprised the majority of the household budget, I considered myself adequately involved. Diane said we could work through it. She said she'd pay it back. She said she just needed time. I asked her how she planned to pay back $22,000 on a part-time receptionist's wage while continuing to live in a house whose rates, insurance, power, and maintenance I covered entirely. The lounge was very quiet after that. Connor, who had been sitting on the end of the couch looking at his phone, put his phone down. Robin looked at Diane. Diane looked at the folder. I told them what I had decided. I told them clearly and without raising my voice. Because I am 63 years old and I have been in enough difficult conversations to know that volume is not the same as authority. I had spoken with my solicitor. I had a clear understanding of my rights and of Diane's. I was not going to pretend the last 14 months hadn't happened. I was not going to continue funding a household budget that was being treated as an open account by people who were not contributing to it. Connor was 26. He was employed, at least technically. He would need to find his own accommodation within 30 days. I was willing to be reasonable about that. Diane and I had a great deal to discuss, and I had retained a solicitor to assist with that process. I was not angry. I was finished. Diane said I was overreacting. I said I'd been underreacting for several years. She said she wanted to talk about it privately, without the documentation and the solicitor and all of it. She wanted to talk like two people who loved each other. I told her I had tried to do exactly that. Over dinner, more than a year ago, when I'd noticed the account was running lower than it should, I reminded her that she had explained it away and I had accepted her explanation. I reminded her that I had given that goodwill freely, and it had been used to buy another 14 months of the same pattern. Robin stood up at that point and said this was a family matter, and I was turning it into a business transaction. I said I agreed it was a family matter. I said that family was exactly why I'd spent 3 years providing a home, a vehicle, food, and utilities for a grown man who treated my house like a boarding house with no checkout date. I said family was why I'd kept quiet when I should have spoken, and why I'd been patient when patience was, in hindsight, not helping anyone. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Connor, to his credit, and I mean that, genuinely said, "I'm sorry, Graham." Just those 3 words. He said them quietly, without looking at me. But he said them. I nodded. I told him. I accepted that. I told him I hoped he would use the next 30 days to make some real decisions about the direction of his life. And I told him I thought he was capable of more than he'd allowed himself to be. He nodded. He went upstairs. Robin left shortly after, without saying much else. She hugged her sister at the door. She gave me a look that I couldn't entirely read. Not hostile, not exactly sympathetic. Somewhere in between. Diane stayed. Of course she stayed. It was her home too, legally and in every practical sense, and I had never suggested otherwise. We sat in the lounge for a long time after the others had gone. The light went off the back paddock. I heard the neighbor's dog somewhere in the distance. Diane said she didn't know how we had got here. I said I thought we had got here slowly, by choosing not to see things clearly. She cried, and I let her. And I handed her the box of tissues from the side table, and I did not reach across to hold her hand, because I was not yet sure which version of this story we were living in. The one where 2 people who'd made mistakes found a way through, or the one where the kindness had simply run out. I won't tell you which version it turned out to be. Not because I want to leave you with a false mystery, but because that part is still unfolding, and some things deserve the privacy of not yet being known. What I will tell you is what I told my daughter Rachel when she rang me that weekend after I'd called to let her know what had happened. She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked me how I was feeling. I told her I was feeling something I hadn't expected. Not relief. Exactly. Not satisfaction. More like the particular kind of steadiness that arrives when a man stops pretending he can't see what's directly in front of him. She said, "Good, Dad. That's good. I think it is. I have thought a great deal, in the weeks since, about the things I wish someone had said to me earlier. Not warnings. I'm not sure warnings would have changed anything, but clearer truths about how these situations develop, slowly and then all at once. And how easy it is to confuse patience with passivity, generosity with permissiveness. Here is what I know now. Generosity is a decision you make freely. The moment someone else begins to make it for you, it has become something else. A household is not a charity, and love is not a blank check. Both require contribution, not necessarily equal, not necessarily in money, but real and ongoing. A person who takes without noticing they are taking has not decided to be unkind. They have simply not been asked to be responsible. The asking is not a cruelty. It is, in fact, a form of respect. When you sense something is wrong and choose not to look at it directly, you are not keeping the peace. You are simply deferring the cost. The cost does not diminish in storage. It accumulates interest. It is not too late, at 63, to decide what you are and are not willing to live with. It is not too late at any age. The moment of clarity doesn't care how old you are. And if you have a financial arrangement with anyone, a partner, a family member, a friend, document it. Not because you distrust them, because documentation is what allows a conversation to be about facts rather than feelings. And facts, in my experience, are far kinder to everyone in the end. I am still in my house in Pirongia. The tomatoes are doing well. The pohutukawa out front is fully in flower now, red as anything. And if it was warning me of something, I think I've already passed through it. I still cook a roast on Sundays. That part, at least, hasn't changed.